Welcome to Improvisationally Speaking, the podcast. I'm Julian Schrenzel. When I think about professions, the top professions that require you to be able to perform, be able to engage, be able to do your job in an environment where you have little control over what goes on, and a lot of different things can go on, the orchestra conductor is probably one of the most demanding jobs when it comes to being able to deal with stuff as it comes, roll with the punches. Today's guest is Alastair Willis. He is a Grammy-nominated conductor. He currently serves as music director for the South Bend Symphony Orchestra in South Bend, Indiana, but he's been a guest conductor with major orchestras around the world, including Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, San Francisco, Mexico City, Rio de Janeiro, areas across Europe and across Asia. He's also a great friend of mine, and we're going to have a conversation today about improvisation in his life and in his work, and how he deals with the unknown and the uncontrollable. From the sunny Seattle studios of Improv-Alive, this is Improvisationally Speaking, and my name is Julian Schrenzel. Thanks for joining us today. So, all right.
So I should be prepared for anything?
Sure you can.
Because I don't know anything
You don't know anything about anything, right?
Here we are, right?
Yeah. All right, are you ready?
As ready as I will ever be.
Alastair Willis, welcome to Improvisationally Speaking, the podcast.
Thank you.
The video podcast. And here we are, we have in-person Alastair Willis, Grammy-nominated conductor. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of looking at, I know you personally. For many years I've known you personally. But I want to read a little bit just kind of the stuff that was interesting about you for my listeners. So, Alastair, you currently serve as music director for the South Bend Symphony Orchestra in South Bend, Indiana. You have guest conducted major orchestras around the world, including Chicago, Philadelphia, New York Philharmonic, San Francisco, Mexico City, Rio de Janeiro, Herford Germany, Hong Kong, Bejing China. I'm sure there's many other places that are not on your bio. But you've been doing this, how long have you been conducting? How long have you been a professional conductor?
Professional conductor, so doing it for money as opposed to doing it for love?
Exactly.
I ended my studies in 1999, so that's when I
That's all, just 19 years? That's it?
Yeah, 19 years.
When you hear it that way, it's amazing, isn't it?
Gosh, yes.
I was interested to know something I did not know about you, which was that you grew up in a multi countries. You started out here. You were born in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. You moved to Moscow. Mm-hmm. Moscow, and then we're not talking Idaho.
We're not talking Idaho.
No, we're Russia.
Yes.
And then you moved to England, mm-hmm. which is where you were from 5 years old on to college, right?
Oh, 0 to 5 America, 5 to 10 Russia.
Oh.
And then from age 10 in England.
So how do you think, if it did, how did all that change, the difference, the variety you grew up with, how did that contribute to your abilities as a musician and as a conductor? And maybe they're two different kind of abilities that they sparked in you, but how did that happen? What did they serve? Did they serve you, and how?
I think about that a lot, and I think they certainly did, which comes back to the tip of the iceberg, which is being grateful to my parents for giving me and my sisters these opportunities of experiencing part of the world, especially when we're young. Mm-hmm. When you don't have a care in the world, and you can just really take it in and not have to worry about jobs or living or anything. So age 0 to 5, I don't really remember that much about. Mm-hmm. We lived just outside of Boston, mm-hmm. and I was the youngest of 3, 2 older sisters, and next door to us were 4 girls. So I was hanging out with girls a lot, and I was always the youngest.
What are you, a musician? Just kidding.
So I don't have musical memories at this time, but when we moved to Russia,
mm-hmm.
this Cold War, Iron Curtain, 76 to 81.
That's right.
Brezhnev years. We lived in Moscow. Dad was a journalist. That's why we moved there. Mm-hmm. We were not looking forward to that, to moving there and leaving all our friends in Boston. I didn't know that, but that's what my parents were telling. I was up for an adventure. You are at that age, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was in Russia that I found music, or music came to us. We had a Russian piano teacher who came to the apartment, and would teach first my sisters, and then I'd always go last. So I'd be able to hear what my sisters did and, make quick progress because I could almost anticipate the mistakes and before they happened with me. But my older sister was always the best musician, and middle sister was kind of gave up very quickly because her argument was that somebody had to be in the audience. And to this day, my older sister, her influence, I think, is inspiration is the greatest for me. She plays now in a small orchestra called the Berlin Philharmonic. And
what's her instrument?
French horn.
Okay.
And so she is. She's just amazing, just at the top of her game, one of the best French horn players in the world. Wow. I'm digressing. So music in Russia was a big thing. Very strict piano teacher, good foundation. And more importantly, I think, was that my mother is a dance critic and loved ballet, obviously. And we went often to the Bolshoi. Now, I've got to say we were dragged to the Bolshoi because I'd rather be playing ice hockey with my friends on a Saturday or a Sunday. I mean, this was not fun for me. Yeah. But over time, this has, if I'm going to jump forward many, many years, I love ballet now and I love conducting ballet. I work a lot with the ballet company here in town, Pacific Northwest Ballet,
right.
One of the best in America. And it's always a joy to do that. I love that. So I would say that those Russian years and my exposure to the greatest dancers, the greatest one of the greatest companies in the world, the Bolshoi, has helped, if not knowing it back then, at least subliminally now, so that when I hear Russian music, and then you combine Russian music with ballet, I mean, this is a connection that I really feel strongly about.
Yep.
Now, in the concert hall today, I love Russian music for the Russian connection.
Yeah.
And so there's that as well. But I would say that when I got to England, and then I discovered the trumpet, my sister at this stage was learning the French horn, and again, kudos to my family and my middle sister who had to put up with the trumpet being practiced at one end of the house and the French horn at the same time. Yeah. I mean, how did they survive? But they did. I think that these experiences, now looking back, having American roots helps me get work. I've got an American passport. I can work in America. I'm not here on a visa, even though I have an English passport because of my mother. And to have the global traveling experience of not just living in Russia, but when we had a summer holiday, we would go somewhere exotic. And we went not just Scandinavia, which is the obvious closest place to go. We would go to Sri Lanka. We would go to Africa. We would go to really, really interesting places. Some places that I've not been back to, and I've traveled a lot since then. Yeah. So this just gives, to quote, Yoyo Ma, one of again the biggest inspirations in my life. I've worked with his Silk Road Ensemble. He says knowing somebody else's culture gives you a greater understanding of your own and your own place in the world. Now I'm paraphrasing that a little bit, but that's essentially something that will always stay with me.
That's a good point.
And this, of course, translates to who I am as a conductor off the podium, because any orchestra is full of not just Americans or English people or Italians. They're full of people from all over the world. It's a mini cosmopolitan group, often of many different nationalities, and not all of them will speak English, but we all speak music.
Do you feel when you work with an orchestra that has a lot of different kinds of cultures, different mishmash of people from completely different worlds, do you find the music to be generally, is there a characteristic trait that happens? Is there something that they're better at or that they have a challenge at more because of their disparate backgrounds?
That depends on the orchestra. There's an answer for that for each different orchestra. You conduct English music with an English orchestra, largely English. You're thinking, okay, well, they've got an affinity for that. American music with American orchestras, Russian music, Russian orchestras. When I was with the Mexico City Philharmonic, I learned a bit of Spanish to be able to speak, and I very clearly gave, measure compasos cinco, from where we were going. I can't remember it now. And very clearly, and they all looked up and they went, wow. I started conducting and 3 people played. That's because not everybody understands Spanish in the Mexico City Philharmonic.
Of course.
And I don't have the time to say it in Italian, French, German, Russian, English, and Spanish, which would have covered most of them. So there's always a bit of improvisation there, but Italian is the number one language. You can say molto legato or più staccato, and this will mean the same wherever you are in the world.
Right.
And this is the most wonderful thing about music. In Hungary, where I conduct, I don't speak Hungarian. Mm-hmm. The orchestra where I am, they don't speak English, so we rehearse in German.
Oh.
So, which is our common language, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all sorts of things, but the different traits and how they play a piece will depend on the ability of the orchestra and very much on the orchestra itself.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. The idea of a conductor in music is really, there's a lot of parallels to be drawn to like a business setting, an organizational setting. My work, a lot of times I'm working with companies here in the Pacific Northwest, managers working with a group of people, and there's issues that are related to communication. How do I effectively communicate this goal to these people? How do I motivate them? How do I, what is the structure of communication up and down the scale from the person who's the lead to the person who's an individual contributor? And there's a major parallel between the two. And I want to know, I know from working with a lot of companies, I know common problems that management, senior executives, people will have with an organization, with people that directly report to them. And I'm wondering, as a conductor, what do you think is what is the challenge that you have to run into over and over again? Or trouble, or number of things.
This is such a big subject, and I love talking and thinking about this. When I was starting out, the biggest challenge was, he's young, he probably doesn't know anything. He's going to waste our time. Coming from the inward thoughts of musicians who've been playing for 20, 30, 40 years in an orchestra, who know much more than the conductor. And the only way I knew about this was to not pretend that I was older, but to really go for the music. And in general, what I found is if an orchestra, whatever orchestra it is, if they sense that a young conductor is really knowledgeable with the score and going after the things that the composer's indicated, as opposed to his own will or his own bias or preferences or whatever, which could be good but could be wrong, but invariably will be wrong. If you're going after what the composer wants, there will be a common ground of respect from which we all start. So that is really the only thing to do, and just to keep strong and be true to yourself in that regard. My schooling was all about, the score is the Bible. If it's not in the score, you shouldn't really be doing it. And of course, the more I conduct, the more older I am. That's not my challenge anymore, because top conductors develop because they can, I think, understand a phrase, taking it off the print. Which is, and when you're young, you've got to start with the print. Okay, there's a crescendo there, it has to go to here because that's what it says so. But what is the real gesture of the music? Because that we need to portray, and will the crescendo last a little longer, or a little shorter, or where will the peak be? Because composers, they only have limited ways of how to actually express that. Today's composers, they can write words in the score, they can make it exactly clear, they can no doubt what they want. But we're talking Bach, we're talking Beethoven, we're talking Haydn. They wrote the tempo and a dynamic, and you can't play it exactly like that. There's got to have phrasing and shaping, and so how to take that off the page in that road.
So how do you do that when you're working with a group of, or these musicians who have 40-year musicians who are looking at you saying, you don't know what you're doing, you're a kid, and then you come across, you have a score where you don't have a clear roadmap. How do you feel? Do you feel confident at all times?
I do now, but it was tough back then.
How did you get to a point to feel confident?
Well, I guess as you grow and as you observe other conductors, and as I did be an assistant conductor with two great orchestras, the Cincinnati Symphony and the Seattle Symphony, and you meet other conductors, older, more experienced, you figure out how they did this. One of the things to do in Baroque music and classical music that is very popular now, which I didn't know about, is to mark your own set of parts. So instead of just my score, I will have the violin part, I'll have the second flute part, I'll have every single orchestra part. And if I need a crescendo that's not written by Beethoven, I will pencil that in the part. So they will see that in advance. They'll know it's coming. And if there is a question about it, then they'll say why. But I was at a rehearsal recently with a top orchestra and a top conductor, and he did something in a certain measure that is not in the score, and I said, why? It's not written. There's a crescendo only for the winds, not for the strings. Why do you give a crescendo for the strings? I've never heard that before. And he said, well, look at the harmony of the winds. They invite the strings to give more at this moment. And this is a compelling reason for me. He didn't need much but an orchestra musician from a young conductor might say, hey, you got to tell us why. That's not enough just because you want it. Did the composer want it? But I guess as you get older, you get more experience, and that brings hopefully more respect.
Do you think that there are organizations, like when I think about companies, there are those organizations that are by their culture, they are more game. They're more open to whatever.
Yes.
And then you got those other companies that have very rigid structures. Do you find in an orchestra, do you find the same thing? And when you do, what's that like for you?
Well, different orchestras, for example, look at Los Angeles. I mean, they have one of the most outward looking and forward-looking dispositions of any orchestra in America, if not the leading the way in everything, the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And I think that's a culture that doesn't happen overnight. It has to happen over years with leadership from the very top. I mean, it's no surprise they have one of the most dynamic young conductors as their head right now, Gustavo Dudamel, who I have tremendous respect for. There are other orchestras who play fantastically, perhaps even better than Los Angeles, and I would say the Cleveland Orchestra. They are one of the top orchestras in America, if not the top. I just read an article arguing that they are sounding better than any other orchestra in America. Whether you agree, that's speculative. But they have had a history of a more conservative, a more European-based, not less outward-looking, but I guess less outward-looking, of a different nature. And it's a different animal, if you will, and anything in between. When you have a smaller orchestra with a smaller budget, they tend to be very, very careful because you haven't got the space to take risks like you would do in Los Angeles or in Cleveland.
I would have guessed the smaller one would have been more agile, more open, more...
And you can find this. You certainly can find this, and I've conducted orchestras like that. I'm very grateful that my orchestra in South Bend seems to be very outward-looking. And I'm in my first year as music director there, and of course one of the biggest things that a music director brings is an artistic vision, which hopefully will be shared by everybody, not just one person's vision. And we're having great conversations about that right now and where we're going to look forward in the next season with regards to programming and who we are and what we do. You look at the Seattle Symphony here for the last few years under their, who's now just left to go to Los Angeles, Simon Woods, the executive director. I've got so much respect for him as well. He has brought the orchestra to a new, I would have to say, civic responsibility. Who are we really serving? And in his time, the orchestra doesn't just play fantastic concerts, but they go out and they play for homeless people. They play in shelters. They do hospital work. Now a lot of orchestras are doing this, but they're really giving back to the community. And so music is changed a lot from when you study one instrument at school and you hope to get a job in an orchestra and that's all you do for the rest of your life. We all have a civic responsibility as an individual and as an orchestra. But I'd like to go back to what you said about how does the chain of command work? And again, I go back to Simon Woods on that. Simon's, he's an extraordinarily gifted leader. And he's just been snatched by an orchestra bigger than Seattle, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, to take over from Deborah Border, who's one of the legendary executive directors of all time. She's now at the New York Philharmonic. So you see, so Simon is going up. He didn't go down. He's gone up. And there've been a lot of articles on him recently. So what is your leadership, style? And his leadership style is, of course, to allow each of his staff to do their job, to give them the room to do that, not to try to shape it themselves or to micromanage. He lets them do it.
Does that tie into the civic responsibility?
It's absolutely sure it does, because people, he has only two eyes, and you have your staff who have many more eyes as to where an orchestra could give a lunchtime recital in one of the buildings downtown, which has a great acoustic. But there's an escalator going, which they turn off, so there's not that sound in the lobby there. And I went to that concert. It's great to see them do things like that. Yeah. They did a side-by-side concert when I was with the Seattle Symphony. They always did a side-by-side concert, but now they're doing more of them. And what I mean by that, with schools and youth orchestras. And this these are life-changing moments for our community to have kids play next to the professionals.
Yeah.
But for a conductor, this is the same. In an orchestra, the conductor, I guess the musicians are paid to do what the conductor says. That's whether they like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to like it, but you've got to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the end of the. That's how it works.
Yep. I think we're okay.
And did we go off? Okay. But then there's a chain of command. I've got my concert master. Now he or she is the next most important person, if you will, because there are more violins than any other instrument in the orchestra. Could be up to maybe 30. And so there's got to be one leader for them. So when I'm conducting, I try to involve everybody, but if I have a question, or if I need to address the violins, I will always address the concertmaster because the authority comes from that person. And if you're sitting at the back or the middle of the first violins, you can ask a question, and there's more of an acceptance to be able to do that. But in the olden days, you'd have to pass your question forward so that the question just came from that person. But then you look at the second violins. There's a principal second violin, principal viola, principal cello, principal bass. So those 5 people there are the ones who then will pass back the information. And then with the winds and the brass, you always have the principals there. And so if all the oboes are playing together, they should be following not necessarily the conductor, but their principal. So you see all this. So for example, let's say all the winds and brass are playing together. I could try to gather everybody with my arms and bring them all in, but everyone's responsibility now is focused on me, and every now and then that is what we have to do. But the greater job as a leader is to give them the power to follow their leaders. So I tell my orchestra, if the woodwinds are all playing, I'm just going to be conducting the first flute. To bring that person in. So that first flute has to lead, and they have to be with the first flutist.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm not listening to everybody else.
Right.
But it's this idea, this makes this first flute feel important because he or she is important and is a leader.
Right.
And it's all about, for me, who's the most important voice in the orchestra at any one time, and that of course is determined by the composer. And if it's not clear, then I have to make the decision that I need to hear the horn above the violas, let's say.
Do you think that the 5th chairperson, does that ever make them feel, well, he's not even looking at me or conducting me, so...
I'm always looking at the 5th chair, at everybody, and I'm embracing everybody, as every conductor is when they conduct. But when it comes down to the chain of command, as you're talking about, and how it works in rehearsal, then that 5th chair knows his or her place in where it fits in, and that 5th chairperson will never try and lead the rest of the section behind. Right. So so there are always solutions to be found.
So what's cool about conducting an orchestra and performance is you're working in performance. That's your purpose, is to perform. And so it creates an environment that is kind of this microcosm environment where everything, like the business principles of organization, seem to be projected greatly, because now you're doing it for a whole bunch of people who have paid a lot of money to see you do something, and you're trying to do something that everybody knows. If the flute hits the flat instead of a natural, everybody's going to know it. Or even if they go out of tempo, or there's something that's not exactly right, it's very easy to hear it. So it's very transparent. You can't hide behind anything.
That's right.
In that environment, I assume, do you feel that as a really high stakes, is my first question. And the second part of that is, how do you then deal with the times where something happens in that moment that wasn't what you wanted it to be, and it's not going the way you want, and there's some unknown factor or something that you're not able to fully make the way you want it to do? How do you handle that right in the midst of what you're doing?
It's almost the same answer for both, actually. We're human. We're not robots. We want to take risks. We want to lead the audience, our listeners, our paying public, on a journey that is thrilling, that is not just like safe.
Does that even go with like the English orchestra playing the English music? Or that's not conservative. The most conservative orchestra. I'm thinking English equals conservative.
No, and again, that depends on the conductor and the culture that's there. But as far as I'm aware, the vast majority of the orchestras that I conduct, and who I am as a person, we want to be taking a risk. So for example, I would want, if it's a very difficult passage and it needs to be louder, I would like it to be louder, and that might push the player into a position where it's uncomfortable, and it will be a risk because they might miss the top note, let's say. And I will I will encourage if they don't get it. If they really can't, I'll back down. But if they can, and I know they can, I've often said, that we'll have more respect for you if you go for it and miss it than if you didn't go for it and got it blandly or still missed it. Yeah. So it's the idea of encouraging people to do their job and then to let them do it.
So you'd say it's more important that someone give it their full heart and
all
soul
the time.
And mess it up
right.
than it is to do it perfectly, but without that, whatever that spark, without a spark.
It needs to have a spark. That's what moves the audience. Otherwise, they can just sit and listen to a recording at home the whole time. But the thrilling risk of the live performance is what we come for, the experience, the communal experience with everybody else on the edge of their seats. So if something goes wrong, well, if it's a one-off moment in a rehearsal, for a one-off moment in a concert, there's nothing much you can do. In rehearsals, that's where you establish it. So let's say we rehearse and we've had problems and we've got them right. And we do the concert, but the problems come back. That's, I would say, the human side of performance. And the next set of rehearsals, you just address them again. And hopefully, over time, the execution in the concert will rise. The level will rise. And I learned this from my sister, who essentially, I had a chat with, one player in an orchestra made a terrible mistake, came in at the wrong time, wrong note and everything. And as a conductor, my instinct was to glare at this player in concert. But my sister said, you never do that. You've got to encourage them no matter what happens. You can show them, note you're wrong. You can wait to show them everything visually that you can without saying a word. And conductors really shouldn't speak in performance. If you hear the conductor's voice in a performance in the pit in the orchestra, something's gone really wrong. So we show with visuals, and if you need to, you chat with the player afterwards, or you address it in the next rehearsal with everybody. And maybe a group of musicians went off wrong. So when it really messes up like that, it's about understanding. It's so hard to play in an orchestra. It's such an amazing skill set that you've got to have respect and understanding and patience and love for these musicians.
Totally.
As you know, as a singer, to be able to learn notes and words and then act around or sing on your back in the opera, however, upside down as the director wants you, it's so hard. My job as conductor is to support and help. Now I obviously want to inspire in the audience in the concert as well, and we all want to do that. And if I inspire too much in rehearsals, there's nothing left to give. In concert, you've got to pace yourself.
Yeah.
But it's all a question of where are we going. And there's a time and a place to address everything.
Sure.
And to look really upset or to obviously be angry at somebody in a concert in front of a lot of people, that's not very professional.
Totally. Are you, when you're conducting in a performance, are you serving the players, or are you serving the audience in your head?
I'm serving the composer.
To
go back to an earlier question of yours, a slight different question, slight different answer. People ask me, do I have an orchestral sound in mind? What do I feel? And do I want it to sound brilliant? Do I like a brighter brass like Chicago? Do I like a richer string section like some European orchestras? And for me, the sound of the orchestra depends on the composer. Depends on the piece. So I approach whatever orchestra I'm conducting is to what would the composer want. And sometimes the same composer wants completely different sounds. And that's fine. And that's the job, to convince the orchestra, because at the end of the day we're so worried about, are we playing the right notes, are we playing the right shortness, the length, the loudness, the softness, the speed, and we forget that really the sound is the most important. Can we get all those technical things with the feeling and the sound? Will it be a warm sound? And will it be a blended sound? Or do we want individual sounds coming out here? And each piece is different. So for me, it's really, really important to get the sound that I think the composer wants.
Yeah. Do you recall a specific moment in performance that is a moment that particularly sticks out to you as one that was just wonderful? Anything that sticks out beyond, like a performer or an athlete can be in the zone and have this performance where they are in the zone and they look back, they don't even remember it, but they just remember this was a time when for somehow it all just, that kind of moment. Do you have that as a conductor?
I've got many, but I can give you just two if I can.
Please.
We were on tour in Japan with the Silk Road Ensemble. And my performance I didn't conduct the whole concert, I just did the second half. And a very long piece and very difficult. They're not a conducted ensemble. You know, if there's a conductor, then it must be very tricky. And I was there, and I hadn't conducted it particularly well 2 days ago in Tokyo. And Yoyo called me in and totally, broke down any defenses that I had, and appreciated me and how much and he gave me some thoughts and some advice which just rang so true to me. He didn't just give me conducting advice, he gave me life advice in this moment. And we got to the rehearsal and I was able to execute what he and I had planned. And in the concert, I was able to take it to another level. And there are a couple members of the Silk Road Ensemble who still remember this performance.
Really?
I do too. It was a very, very special in every sense. And I thank Yoyo for that. The second, it's a longer story with all the specifics and it's fantastic, but the second story was when I was working with a circus called Circus Flora in St. Louis. And we were working with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and the orchestra's on stage, upstage, and the circus performers performing downstage. Just was an amazing experience, and the at the time, probably she still is, the world record hula hooper. For be able to hula hoop as many, I think over 100 hula hoops at one time for a certain amount of seconds. I mean, just amazing. She had this routine which fit to a movement of Bizet's Carmen. And I was sent the recording so that I knew exactly how long I had to do it and the speed, because they are timing their routine, obviously, to be a certain length. And the first couple of nights, she was right on cue, and at the end we all ended together. And on the third night, I looked around and she hadn't gotten to the big finale. Right a few bars before the end, the woodwinds trill, dam, ba-da-dum, and it ends. And she's supposed to come out of her hula hoops and pose at that moment. And the place goes nuts. And so I looked around, she hadn't got to that moment. And she looked back at me. It's like, I'm done. With a disappointed face that I don't think my tempos were different. She might have taken a little bit of time. When you think of a circus band who are watching the whole time, they can vamp. 3 or 4 players. They can vamp easily, and they can see that as it goes along. And they know. I had my back to her most of the time, orchestra upstage. But I look around at this moment, and she's not done that. So I had a decision to make. Do I end the piece? No, I held the trill. I indicated to her. Within a half a second, she knew what I was doing. She then took her 15, 16 seconds. It was a long trill. Some of the rest of the orchestra joined in. The woodwinds breathe when they need to. We know what we're doing. And I think the audience caught on to what we were doing. And she gave her grand finale. And then at the right moment when she was. I still remember this moment. I got the biggest hug afterwards and so much appreciation. And to be in the moment, to be able to help her do her job, but also to help the orchestra and tell them where we were, that they were responding to that. It was very much a team effort at that moment. And these are magical moments that will always be with me.
You think you want to leave as a legacy with your work, your life's work?
I'm asked that when I audition for jobs. To get to that answer, before I got my first job, I'd only guest conducted around the world. And my first job as music director, as an assistant conductor with Cincinnati and Seattle, that's one thing. But I guest conducted for about 8-9 seasons before I won my first position. So I was completely experienced with going somewhere for a week or 2 weeks and then saying goodbye. It's like what you call multiple dating, if you will. But a marriage would be being music director of an orchestra for more than a week. So if I had a 4-year contract with Illinois. So asking what I want to leave, I would always say hypothetically, well, I'd like to make more of a difference somewhere than I can do in a week. And to have lived that with the Illinois Symphony, to be living that with the South Bend Symphony, to look back and to see the difference that I made in that community, to those people, to that orchestra, it's it's a wonderful feeling of having achieved something more than just a concert. You look over a line, you take an audience, a community on a journey with music for certain goals that we all vision that we have together. For example, maybe Silk Road performers throughout the season, over time, over years, you see the orchestra get better. You audition people, you see the orchestra grow, get better artistically. You leave it in a better place than when you had it. These are really, really satisfying things. But now, with that in mind, to answer your question, it's as simple as I would like to have left a legacy of making a difference for the better in people's lives. Music isn't just for concerts. It's. I mean, the Jose Antonio Abreu from the El Sistema, the Venezuelan youth orchestra system where you give a kid a violin instead of a machine gun in these these very difficult and politically destitute places, and with drugs and crime and all that. There are so many kids playing music now there. It's an incredible thing, but not all of them are going to go into professional music. But his point is that the skills that they will learn in playing in this orchestra will carry them through to whatever they do in life. Now this, of course, translates to whatever we hear in a concert, whatever we hear from a composer, whatever we're learning by playing in an orchestra, it changes us. Music, and what is your soundtrack? That's another question I like. I want to have had a soundtrack of giving, and there's so much that I can affect and so much difference that I can make by being music director somewhere. And that's a legacy that I want to leave, to have made lives richer.
Yeah. Alastair, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today on Improvisationally Speaking. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, our company website, which is improv-alive.com. And we will look forward to seeing you next episode.